I now look to Kito Boer to close the case for the opposition.
I didn't realise when I was asked to speak last that I was actually standing between you and jumping cocktails at £2.50 each. It strikes me that to single out the Arabs for the failure of the Palestinian cause is broadly the same as trying to suggest that Gavrilo Princip, the assassin of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, was solely responsible for causing the First World War, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the Soviet Revolution. I think any student of history who will want to understand how a single bullet brought Europe to its knees would want to have to dig deep to understand the context and the root causes of what happened. And I would suggest that to this House, that if you really want to understand the underlying failure to deliver the Palestinians the state that they deserve, you also have to dig deep and understand the context and the root causes. The starting point of that examination is to recognize that the principal objective of the global powers in the 20th century, the US, Britain, and France, when it comes to the context of the Holy Land, had a primary objective. And the primary objective was not to create a Palestinian state out of the Mandate Palestine. That would have been a pretty simple exercise to do. They already had their own country. No, the principal objective of the world powers in the 20th century was to create a secure homeland for the Jewish people. And it wasn't just because of the Holocaust. There was a recognition amongst the leaders at the time that anti-Semitism in Europe had been around for centuries, and it was deep and it was broad. They did not think that the Holocaust was a singularity which would not return. They made the judgment that the anti-Semitism in Europe was such a pernicious cancer that unless and until they found a permanent solution, a permanent home for the Jewish people where they could be safe and secure, history was likely to repeat itself. So the creation of a Jewish homeland was a reflection of a deep ill of anti-Semitism throughout Europe. The objective was to create the state of Israel, and the three countries were very diligent in doing that. If you look at the first 6 months of 1948, when Mandate Palestine was in a state of flux, and the military powers between Palestine and Israel were trying to work out what the borders of the new country would be, people asked the question, well, why didn't the Arabs do more? Well, the question then becomes, which Arabs? Who? How? Who actually had the power, the boots on the ground? At that time, the most powerful Arab force was the Arab Legion, which then became, a couple of years later, the Jordan Army. The Arab Legion had the power to be able to enforce Arab will on Mandate Palestine, if they chose to do that. But the Arab Legion was not really an Arab force. It was a force that was created by the British, it was funded by the British, and it was run by Glub Pasha, a British army officer. And the last thing the British wanted to do in the first 6 months of 1948 was to create an independent Palestinian state, particularly an independent Palestinian state run by the al-Husseinis, who had been their principal enemies throughout most of the Second World War and had been close to Hitler and to Mussolini. So no, the British weren't going to permit their proxy state to encourage a Palestinian state to emerge. No, rather what they were doing was negotiating early on with the Israeli state to make sure that as much of the Palestinian people and land went to King Hussein. And then there was the French. They didn't like the idea of the British becoming the dominant force after the Second World War in the Middle East. So they started to arm and support the proto-Israeli state. They gave them the military weapons and the nuclear technology to make sure that they were secure. And then there were the Americans. The Americans have given $200 billion in today's dollars to support the state of Israel. At the point of information, the Palestinians have received not $100 billion, as the previous speaker talked about, but $42 billion. Still a sizable amount of money. But that $200 billion that the Americans have given to the state of Israel needs to be put into some sort of comparison. The Marshall Plan, which helped to rebuild Europe after the Second World War, in today's dollars, was $100 billion. So what the US has given Israel is twice what they invested in rebuilding Europe after the Second World War. And it's still counting. They have just done another agreement for 10 years for another $38 billion of military aid. So the states were concentrated on focusing on building a secure homeland for the Israeli people, for the Jewish people. Job done. So where are we today? How do the Arabs look at the situation at the moment? To begin with, I think the Arabs would say that the principal objective that they have at the moment is to deal with the withdrawal of the US from the Middle East. They understand that they are leaving, and what's going to be left is a reversion back to how things used to be with the dominance of the two major powers in the region, which is Turkey and Iran. And they're feeling very vulnerable, and they're looking around, they're trying to say, who do we actually ally with in order to be able to secure our position? And they understand that Israel is the free agent. They are the most powerful player in the region, and the Arab states are saying, we want not to be in conflict with Israel, we want to be working with them. Does this mean that they are abandoning the Palestinian people? I think they would say no. Their view is very much like the view Brussels has of Brexit. Brexit is a British thing. The British are the ones who've created the problem. The British have to solve it. We in Brussels can sit there and we can make life at the margin a bit easier or a bit more difficult. But ultimately, the British broke it. The British have to fix it. God knows how. So the view of the Arab states is, we did not create the Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian problem. The only people who can fix that are the 50% of the people living between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea who are Jewish, and the 50% of the people who are Palestinian. So what my Arab friends would say to this house is, it is not the Arab world that has failed the Palestinian people. If you're really seriously concerned about the Palestinian people, then what this house should be debating is that the Israelis have failed the Palestinian people. Thank you.